Hi everyone, welcome to the very first episode of the Founder and Mothering podcast series, where I am talking to my wider circle of mums and sharing some time-saving, game-changing tips for the parenting side of things. So today is our first episode and I'm really stoked to have my good friend, fellow mum and registered dietitian, Gemma Bankier here, to help cut through all the overwhelm and talk about how we think about feeding our baby solid food for the first time. So, Gemma, welcome to the podcast.
You're
my very first guest. I'm so excited.
We've been talking about this for a few weeks, so it's great to be here. We're doing it.
I know, we're doing it. We're finally doing it. Both the baby, all three babies, seriously.
Yes, it's amazing.
Which leads me into my first question. So maybe you can just tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and who's in your family.
Sure. So I'm mum of two. I've got Harrison, who's 2 years old. He'll be 3 in a couple of months. And then Elodie, who's 6 hours younger than your son Sonny. So
that's exactly right.
We're sort of more like new mum friends. Our babies are 7 months old now, so having them in the same hospital, like hours apart, is kind of crazy. And here we are.
I know. It's amazing. Yeah, and I'm kind of grabbing the fact that you've got a child before Elodie. And have been through all of it before. I'm clamoring to all of that and trying to get all of the information I can out of you because you're doing such an amazing job with Harrison and Elodie. They're both gorgeous.
They're pretty great. And my husband is Shane. So, he's been awesome and he's probably just been pretty excited about the solids journey. He doesn't have to do near as much of the cleanup this time around because he's not really around as much. But, so that's us. And
that's such a good point about having the partner get a bit more involved in it. Because that's so true, isn't it? Especially if you've been the one kind of doing it up to date. Yeah. And it is really fun. I mean, I'm just going to get into it. But now that I'm kind of through, I guess, the start and that overwhelming part at the start where you're kind of like, there's always information on Instagram and people that you're talking to. Every mum's got a different kind of approach. Yeah. There's so much that you're thinking about. So it's firstly like, how do you navigate that information? But also in my mind, I had this kind of like story that it was just going to be this huge bit of life admin that I'm going to need to like have food prep for like a tiny baby and I'm terrible at having food prepped even for myself. So I was like, how am I going to fit this into my already really busy schedule? And so I think that kind of sense of overwhelm that we talk about a lot, the Founder and Mother podcast, is huge. And the other side of it, and with all the help and tips that you've given me, it's now one of the funnest and messiest. We were just talking before about how messy it is, messiest parts of the day. But it's so amazing seeing them like use a spoon for the first time and just what they do and don't kind of like. So you've had experience with Harrison, who is now well on his way, I'm sure, eating very solid food. And we've got Elodie, who is very similar to Sonny, kind of just kicking off in the last, I suppose, like 4 or 6 weeks. Yeah. And so 3 meals a day. Yeah. And so I guess what would your kind of plan of action, or like, are there some simple steps that you've got from your parenting experience and your dietitian experience that you might pass on to mums who are thinking about this next phase of their kind of feeding journey?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's the whole overwhelm around those first meals. Like, what am I supposed to do? What's it going to look like? How do I know when to start? So if your baby is, if you want to start feeding your baby between 5 and 6 months, awesome. Otherwise, it's probably going to be around that 6-month point. You'll sort of know when your baby's super interested in food and is reaching for your food, and they can sit up pretty well with some support, but they can definitely hold their neck up really well. Then you're sort of thinking it's go time. So you want to be getting some equipment ready. At least they can sit on your knee for the first bit if you want, but it's super messy. So
it's so messy, and it's really hard to do it. Yeah, high chairs are much better. We did the on the lap with Sonny, and
it goes everywhere. So once you've sort of got some of that equipment and you have a bit of an idea of what you want to feed your baby, so the first foods, the best ones really I think are things like pumpkin, kumara, definitely getting some high iron foods into their diet as well. At around 6 months of age, that's when babies' iron stores in their livers tend to be insufficient to carry them through. So we need to introduce high iron foods into the diet. So meats, and if you're a vegetarian, you probably really want to make sure they're getting some legumes like chickpeas, lentils, that sort of thing. So when you're thinking about what first foods should I offer my baby, think, right, vegetables, absolutely. Some high iron foods like those meats and pulses, lentils, chickpeas, that sort of thing. They're really easy to puree up. The meats, I'm always into slow cooking and then putting through the whiz stick or like a NutriBullet with lots of liquid, that sort of thing. Don't go overboard in terms of freezing pureed food, because it's not going to be a huge amount of time that they're on them, and they're going to be eating less than quarter of a cup for that first month. They might even be having like half a teaspoon to a quarter of a cup, and it could vary day to day. So don't think it's huge amounts of food.
That's so good, because I remember I think when Sonny was like 3 months, we were talking about, I was like, what do I need to feed him? So you're giving me this advice, which I've been privy to for a while now. But I was like, okay, anytime I roast any vegetables or any meats from like March onwards, I literally have got them in my freezer from like 20th of March.
Yeah.
These big blocks of like, God knows what we've been cooking. So I was like, oh, that's awesome. I'll just have it in the freezer.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, he doesn't want purees anymore. Like, he's into thicker textures and stuff. So that's such a good point about not overdoing it, because it kind of added to my overwhelm, thinking, oh, I've got to have this freezer stash.
Yeah.
And he's not really into that kind of stuff anymore. So now it's what Colin and I are eating.
Totally. You've got lots of soup for the winter.
Yeah, I've got lots of purees, which is awesome.
Chuck it all together. Yep. And the other thing you can do now is, as they tolerate it, I mean, you can use those purees as a bit of a base and just add some like rice into them, or
excellent.
make a risotto. Then you've got a bit of texture in there, and then lump it all in. It's a way to use it up.
Amazing.
But moving on from those sort of textures to thicker textures to more bitsy textures is really great for helping babies tolerate different textures and move on a bit quicker.
And help introduce a bit more variety, I suppose, as well. And get to that point where people keep telling me this, and we're not there yet, that you can kind of give them what you're eating. Which that will also really help to bring down those stress levels.
Definitely. And I mean, even with my almost 3-year-old, like, he has some sort of derivative of what we're eating, because they hit this, I had the great fortune, of course, after being like trying to do everything awesome with the first introducing solids with Harrison. He's pretty fussy as a kid, so he'll eat like reasonable variety from each of the food groups, but he definitely doesn't want like the fried rice that I had for dinner. He wants like plain white rice. He wants chicken separated from his vegetables. He doesn't want that mixed casserole dish.
He likes and what he doesn't.
And if you're out there listening and you've got toddlers who are fussy and you just wish that they would be eating exactly what the family eats, I know that's so much the goal for everybody going into the starting solids journey. Good luck. You might get that, and you might not. But it's just hoping that they'll have some derivative of what you guys are having. For your dinner time. That's a bit of a dream, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. Totally is.
So protein and iron are really top things to be thinking about. So you mentioned like beef or chicken or like lentils.
Yeah, it's more so the high iron content. Like, the babies don't need huge amounts of protein, but it just happens so that the high iron foods are also high in protein. So iron is really the main nutrient that we want to get into babies.
Awesome.
And taste variety as well. So you might see stuff out there, checklists of achieving like 100 different foods before they turn 1.
Oh, I have actually seen this.
Things like that. So that's just going by the principle of making sure that babies get exposed to as many different tastes as possible. And that's also another reason why some of the pouch products and pre-made baby foods get a bit of a bad rap, not only because of salt and sugar sometimes added to them, but also there's no real variety in taste or texture, and that's what babies really need to develop. If anyone is out there thinking about starting solids and thinking, I'll just kind of go to the supermarket, grab a few different ones, as I say, they're fine to have for out and about sometimes food, but just keep in mind what taste you want to expose your baby to. So many of them have really high contents of added like fruit to complement the vegetables, which it's not really something that we tend to do with our meals. So I definitely say look for ones that have more of a high iron food and vegetable base. So I've seen one that's like a lamb cottage pie sort of taste. I actually bought the salmon and potato ones for Elodie to expose her to fish
Yes.
as an allergen, because we don't regularly have fish in our house.
That's a really good point. Same here.
Yeah. So although, we might have fish once every couple of weeks, we'd love to have it more, but it's pretty pricey.
Yeah.
So I just chose to get the sachets. So I wasn't cooking up fish. It's not something that I did with Harrison. Actually, I'd cook up fish and then I'd freeze it, but it just wasn't. It wasn't great.
I was going to say that's the thing with fish, isn't it? Because if you're not eating it fresh, Because sometimes I've frozen things for him, and I'm like, then I get it out and I think, God, I wouldn't want to eat this. So how am I going to expect a lot of just plain green vegetables all in one kind of ice block? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's great. That's a great tip.
Yeah,
pouches.
So just something to caution with. Like, you want variety, you want texture, you want to texture up, which is, I guess, moving on from puree to mash to chopped food, as quickly as possible, because your baby will then be able to quite happily have finger foods of all different textures as well.
Yeah, which is going to make things a lot easier when you're out and about, and when you've got your
out and about. Yeah.
Crackers and dips with your friends, the baby can get involved in that too. Okay, so we do want to include protein with iron and vegetables, obviously fruits and things as well, and we want to avoid salt and sugar.
Yeah, for sure. They're the main thing. So the nutritional issues with food for babies under one randomly is honey. You don't want to give your baby any honey in their diet. There's a risk of botulism, which is something you don't want your baby to be getting with honey. So it's just wherever the honey's come from, there's a risk. So just blanket no honey. And then salt and sugar are more about they're just unnecessary additives, and we don't want to put any pressure on babies. Their tummies, their kidneys for the salt in particular. So they're the major no-nos in terms of nutrients. But when it comes to texture, you've got to be careful, of course, in terms of choking risk. Gagging is a really normal part of babies learning to eat. Gagging your hair, and it's very red, and you've just got to be there to support them and help them cough it out if needed. Choking, babies don't make a lot of sound, and that's where things get scary when they've got something called in their windpipe. So we need to make sure that when we're providing different foods for babies, we're providing the finger foods in the right texture. So when they're first starting out, you want to have something so soft that you could squish it between your thumb and forefinger.
That's a good test.
Or that your tongue and the roof of your mouth. So if you're roasting it, make sure that it's a really soft roast. Pumpkin's a wonderful one to do. It roasts up really soft. And for babies around 6 months, you want almost like a finger-sized piece of food.
Yeah.
Whereas when they're sort of moving around to 8 months, you can do chopped food, bigger chopped pieces.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so if they can, I guess, see what sort of toys and things around your house the baby is grabbing. Are they using a palmar grip to grab things, like grabbing with their whole hand, or are they grabbing with fingers now?
Yes.
And then they can move to much smaller
finger
foods as well. So
that's a really good tip actually as well, because I actually saw on your Instagram, I think, that you had half a banana cut, but you left the skin on the end for Harrison to hold.
Yeah,
I
haven't done that with Elodie. I really should.
That's my tip to you. Thanks.
Mind you
if you're okay.
Thank you. I do need that.
Yes.
I really need to review my own stuff. So this is an Instagram page that I sort of had for a bit of fun when Harrison was young, and I called it Feeding Little Kiwi, and we went through Little Kiwi or Harrison's feeding journey, and I didn't and still really don't know much about social media, or have not got many skills in that area, but that was an eye-opener experience.
Well, I found it really usul just looking at pictures, because it is one thing to kind of say like this size food and that size food, but just seeing someone else kind of do it, like recipes and stuff as well. Like I find that, when you say you can puree up chicken, I was like, but like how specifically do you do that? So there is some amazing information on there, I think, as well, if people wanted to have a look. But talking about the equipment that you mentioned, like you don't really need much. We've obviously mentioned the high chair.
Yeah.
And we've said that things like you don't need a Thermomix, because that's kind of what I've been seeing recently on some of my friends' stories are like, yeah, just pop it all in here. And I think, does that what you need? But
yeah, sure, if you want one for yourself.
Yes,
but don't
if you can justify getting one for yourself, I'm saying the baby needs it.
Yeah.
But yeah, are there like a couple of things that you would kind of call out as like key pieces of equipment, or things that you think you don't need?
So one thing that I really love for just general infant feeding is, rather than going and buying like silicone bowls and all those sort of fancies, I really love ceramic ramekins that you would maybe buy from a department store. And I love them because you can chuck them in the freezer and you can, say, heat in one in the microwave, and it can get really hot and you're not worried about plastics or silicons like taste mixing with the food, especially if they've been in the dishwasher. That's something to really consider. I used a lot of silicone with Harrison, and they get a very soapy taste after a while because of the washing.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
Just something to consider there. With there's
so
a
it's
lot
not your
of
food that they're not liking. It's the vessel.
Yeah, it's the vessel. Yeah, tell yourself that. So I really do prefer like heating in ceramics, or even if it's like your normal bowls or whatever you're using at home.
It probably gets them more used to kind of that like noise that it makes when you get a spoon with a ceramic versus a plastic as well.
Yeah, especially when you are feeding, you might get away with being there to hold the bowl. And then you can always put them in the freezer so they get really cold, so you can transfer like a piping hot food into it and it cools down really quickly. Because if you've got a very hungry baby and they want to eat, and they want to eat now,
number one tip. Because they can see it coming, and if it's just like with the bottles, if they make them wait even for a second longer, like blowing on it.
Totally. Yeah. So that's one of my tips. Get a stack of little ceramic ramekins. Yeah. And that should see you right when they're really little. When they have it on their high chair in front of them, that's when you want to go to something like, you might be having a silicone plate, it might be plastic, it might be, you can get like quite light aluminium type plates as well, or stainless steel that you can have on the high chair, something that won't break when they throw it on the ground, because they will. My favourite piece of equipment that I have now bought multiple of is called a Barbado bib. And I was just finding with Harrison, it was probably like 3 months before I bought one of these. And every day I would be washing like 3 outfits.
Oh my gosh, we just talking about this, it's crazy.
Yeah, because somehow, even if I had like a coverall bib, which had like arms covered, the neck, the little cuffs around the hands, and then it went down to the waist, there's still a gap between the high chair and the food gets in, and the outfit.
And it's puree as well. It's so
gross.
Loose.
And it stains their clothes as well. So the Barbado is like a coverall bib. It still goes like up to the neck, cuffs around the wrists, but it has quite a long skirt on it with elastic around the bottom that has Velcro on it. So you wrap it around the high chair and Velcro it up really tight. So there's this whole skirt, the child in the high chair are one. So there's this whole area that they can spill stuff. And I will still put one on my 2-year-old when he eats things like rice, because I don't want it to go everywhere, and we don't have a dog to clean it up. And most people who have dogs don't have these same issues as me.
Yes.
But it's such a time saver. I swear, like, it would save me. I think part of their marketing as well with Barbado is, we'll save you 30 minutes a day. Like, probably longer.
Totally see it, yeah.
If you count the admin involved in actually washing the clothes because they're soiled from the meal.
Soaking them first and then washing them. Yes,
totally.
I completely agree. I know loads of mums would as well. Like, it's on their trousers, on the bottom. It's kind of everywhere.
It totally
through there and on their wrists as well. So that's a really big one, because the replacement of clothes, as they start to grow out of them as well.
Totally.
Yeah, and things like pumpkin, blueberries, some of those other foods, they actually can kind of leave
a big stain.
Yeah, a big stain.
Definitely.
Talking about the checklist, is there like a list of foods you think we should know, that we're kind of making sure that we're getting into our babies in those kind of first few?
Sure, yeah. Meals? Like, I guess I've got my own little list of foods that I choose to give my kids. So my top ones would be like carrot, pumpkin, butternut, marrow. courgette, taro, kumara, parsnip, all of those really like starchy foods are so easy to make like a nice puree from. And then they form a good base of a meal as well once they move on from the puree stage. Of course, like chicken, beef, lentils, lamb, and then you get into things like avocado, banana, things that you can mash really easily just with a fork. You're not going to need to
like in the morning as you're doing it. Sorry, like as you kind of
definitely.
Yeah.
As they progress on as well, like I tend to introduce things like wheat bix and oats, especially oats that you like further process down in a food processor to make a porridge from. I'm definitely not avoiding things like baby rice, but if I use baby rice, it's probably to change the texture of a meal and add iron into a meal that doesn't have iron in it already. So a vegetable puree like with for example courgette and peas, it's not a hugely high iron meal without
watery maybe as well.
So I can thicken it and I can add some iron in with baby rice.
I haven't been using it like that, so that's another just full of the tips.
Yeah.
As I knew you would be. Yeah, the pumpkin kind of sweet potato stuff, like it's, I think because it tastes a little bit sweeter as well.
Yeah.
Like I think, I don't know,
they really do love it.
He really loves that. So that's awesome. Yeah, the greens are where we're kind of having to add those into other things to kind of, I'm already trying to like hide the vegetables from it. Not into it. Yeah, that's a really awesome list. And I think when you think about starting with solids, you don't necessarily think about the meat side of things as well. So it's really good to have like the beef, chicken,
definitely,
lamb, lentils, and that kind of stuff.
And balance the meal like we do. Have some sort of carbohydrate. Have lots of veg and some of that high iron food as well. And just keep exposing baby to them and toddler. It takes a good sort of 15 times for a baby to really recognise that they like or dislike the food, and even if they dislike the food, still try and get that variety in there for sure. It's only with exposure that they're going to learn, and exposure can be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be chewing and swallowing the food. Exposure is any sort of sensory experience with food, touching the food, smelling the food, smearing the food on their face. Like any exposure is good exposure.
That's a really amazing point, because especially if you are making this food yourself, obviously you're like attached to the time you put into it and the amazing vegetables you've like gotten for it. So if they're kind of spitting it out, which they do at the start, they kind of just like mouth it a little bit and then it all goes in the bib. It can be a bit disheartening. Like I know a few times Cole's just been like, it's fine, I know I made this whole thing. So it's good to know like the touching, the putting in their mouth. If they swallow, great. If they don't swallow, it's still, they're still getting a lot out of it. So that's a really encouraging tip.
Yeah. And something a dietitian colleague reminded me of when I was studying solids with Harrison as well was try not to think about what they eat in a day. We tend to obsess over what they did or didn't do in the day. Try and think about it over about 4 days as a bit of an average. What have they eaten in the last 4 days? And are they ready to move on to another meal yet or not really? But hopefully, you know, by the time you're getting to around like 8 months-ish, you want your baby to be having about 3 meals a day. So
oh gosh. We're not there
yet. Parents will know when their baby's ready. Some will be a bit faster, some will be a bit slower, and it also depends on how that works for your family. And you might have a baby who drinks milk really well. That's still the most important form of nutrition for babies. Getting their breast milk or their formula milk is still the most important way that they're nourished. So it doesn't matter if they're having one meal at 7 months old or if they're having 3 at 7 months old, but you just want to kick it up by
you want to make sure that you're kind of moving in that direction.
You're moving in a direction as opposed to what happens one day versus the next.
So when I think about the 3 meals a day and the time that's going to take,
today was a busy day for our house. Well, for me doing that.
I can't even imagine.
But it's short-lived. It kind of took me back to thinking, oh man, like I have so much less time in a day, even with my wonderful Barbado bibs, where I didn't have to even change my daughter all day.
That's great.
It was great. So just hopefully everybody gets something out of this, whether it's an idea for what foods to have when starting solids, what equipment they even might want to consider getting.
Yes,
now.
what they don't need.
What they don't need. If
Yeah,
it's not
possibly.
serving you, then get rid of it. Probably my other major tip for parents
Love
is
the tips.
centralize the feeding stuff in your kitchen. Have a dedicated drawer or an area like under the sink where you keep stuff. That might be the cup that baby has for sips of water between eating their solid meal. So that, and whatever bowls and plates and spoons you're using, centralize it all so there's one place to go to. And we know that the busiest part of the mealtime is when it's finished, when your baby is sat there messy as there's just food for miles, and you're like, right, it's time to clean up. That's when you need stuff centralized. So I would say have a big stack of those baby face cloths, like maybe 20 to 30 of them. Keep them in a container under the sink in your house.
Good idea.
And you're going to need about 3 to 4 probably to clean up your baby in your high chair. If you have a babado, then I wet one of those with like a little bit of dishwash liquid and make it quite wet and just wipe down the whole thing. And wait for it to dry for the next meal. At this stage, I'm really only getting like 2 meals out of a babado before I have to put it in the washing machine.
Well, that's double what I'm getting from
and as they get older, it might even be 3. It depends.
So
it depends your tolerance of the way that the bib smells. But if it's clean enough, it's good enough.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Gemma. I feel like there's been so many time-saving tips and hacks that you've mentioned, but just also with that really clear plan of just making sure that there's a lot of variety in what you're feeding your babies, that you're trying to kind of keep it to what you're feeding yourself or the rest of your family and not adding too much stress and getting those iron-rich protein foods in. And it's a really good thing to remember that it's just about that sensory experience, and it's like the more variety that they can get at the start, hopefully further down the track, the more things they'll be into. Although,
fingers crossed.
Who knows? They might all be white rice, white bread eaters.
They could be. It's a very normal part of toddlerhood, but hopefully they come out the other end with having a love of food of all types.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. Everyone I know and everyone that I've spoken to with some of the tips, because I've been putting a few of the things on my Instagram.
It's been great.
Have been responding and like really stoked with some of the information that I've shared through you on the Instagram. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thank you.